Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dragonfly Strategist Insights, week 11. And we're super excited today to have Ryan Goldberg with us from Booking.com. And we have worked with Ryan. Hi, Ryan. We've worked with Ryan on many, many different accounts in New York City. Nicole and I both have. Nicole Tomaso is going to join us as well. And she's one of our directors of revenue strategy for Dragonfly. Hey, Nicole.
Hello.
And hello. Nicole and Ryan have worked and strategized together for a number of different hotels. And Ryan is, I'd have to say, the best market manager that we've ever worked with. Thank you, Ryan.
I agree.
And we wanted to take this opportunity today to just chat a bit about how can hotels partner effectively with OTAs for recovery. I've seen some hotels out there that have said, oh, we're just going to have a direct booking strategy. Maybe this is the time we don't need OTAs, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say that we don't agree with that. I think that, all of the eyes and the traffic and the business and the customers that you guys have are beneficial to us, and that we need to partner effectively. And so we thought we'd have Nicole and Ryan on today to talk about how they have done that over and over again over the past few years in a challenging market like New York City. And so as usual, though, my first question is, Ryan, I'll direct it to you. How are you? How is your family? And, how have you been surviving in New York City through this pandemic?
Hi, and really appreciate this opportunity. Great to always connect with you both. I'm doing well. Luckily, I'm doing well. I've been in the city the entire time. All my family is really healthy, which is great. I think, and we had talked about it in the past, that all of my friends are in the medical field, so I've kind of gotten a close, one-on-one insight in regards to kind of what's going on, especially within the medical community. But luckily, we've all been really, really healthy. I've tried to stay sane, and I've been home and set up a really, really good work from home space. So I have a lot of monitors, so that's really beneficial. So I will give Booking.com a shout out for setting me up for success to be able to work from home.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're doing well and healthy, and your friends and family are. Nicole, how about you in Jersey City? How are things there?
Yeah, things are, somewhat getting back to normal-ish with caution for sure, which is, not the worst thing I've seen. I'll take the extra caution any day. But yeah, luckily, family, all my friends are safe and sound. A few people in my family got the virus, but no one had, any major complications. So super grateful for that. And yeah, have a lot of friends as well that are in the direct front line of healthcare workers in Manhattan and throughout New Jersey as well. So had to hear how their days were, which was pretty intense. So I can't complain at all over here.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad both of you are doing well. I mean, that's the most important thing, that we're healthy and we're staying well. So my first question, and I'm going to direct this at you, Ryan. How would you describe a positive relationship with a hotel and a market manager at an OTA? What does that look like?
So I'll preface that question with first knowing that I also have a hospitality background, so I came from the hotel level, so I know what it's like on both ends. I think and know, at least from the experience from being on both ends, that the most important thing is open and consistent communication. That being on the hotel end, I hated when the OTAs kept me in the dark. And also being on the OTA end, it's always 10 times more beneficial if we're kind of always communicating or just have that open communication, because it really helps to a relationship. And I think, Cole can kind of speak on it, is then we know that we can rely on each other, whatever it is. And I always put it out there that from the OTA perspective, I am here and we're here for whatever you think would be beneficial when you think of an OTA partner. So I set that as a preface. So I think OTAs, market managers, account managers should say that what are your needs, and also what can we do better? And as soon as we know what we can focus on, then we can have that open communication. But I think the communication is the most fundamental and important thing, is to know that neither of us are left in the dark, and we always know who and when we.
Yeah, you know, Ryan, I agree. Nicole, I want you to add to that, of course, but, you know, I think in our experience in working with you, it was about setting out that strategy and then both of us trying to work towards that goal. Yeah, Nicole, what do you think?
Yeah, no, most likely. I think the first step is initiating the relationship. So, you know, number one, reaching out, finding out who your partner is, and just getting on the phone with them to just get a touch base, to meet each other. Typically, we'd like to meet in person, but in this world right now we're in is not always the case. But definitely you can still do a virtual meeting. It's not the same, but it's at least, you know, getting to know each other face to face. So I think that's super important. I also think that, you know, once you start that relationship, you need to realize that it's, they're a business partner. OTAs are a big part of transient business and hotel business that is sometimes looked at as a competitor. So really just trying to establish that trust, I think is critical to the first step. And then once you get there, you can build on that and grow your partnership. But the very first thing is to reach out and initiate that communication, because you're going to get what you give into that initial agreement.
Yeah, for sure. So where do you think the opportunities are for partnering with OTAs for recovery, Nicole? I mean, what do you think is might work for a hotel right now?
Yeah. I mean, just, you know, to get to some tactical things, a lot of OTAs are updating their content to specify what hotels can be doing to highlight what's happening at their hotel. So keeping your guests informed, and we know, you know, if on the hotel level, many guests are searching for you on an OTA. So that's really the first place they're looking to see what's going on. So update any policies that you might have, update any content related to amenities being open. If your pool's closed, let them know when the anticipated open date might be. If your restaurants are limited service, let them know what that looks like. So utilizing any areas of the extranet that you can to talk about your recovery and what you're doing to make your guests feel safe, and also your staff. So that'd be number one. I also think that right now, a lot of our analytics are a little bit skewed based on what we used to look at, which is typically looking at your pace and your year-to-date trends, and all of that is just out the window right now. So everybody's just looking at, you know, what the market looks like as a whole. So again, if you utilize the OTAs analytics to help you understand at least what's happening on a larger scale in your market, and also maybe, you know, in the US, that just gives you information and keeps you on top of what's happening in the industry. So I think those are, you know, some really important areas that you can take a look at right away. I also think that it would be, you know, beneficial for OTAs as well to, you know, be in communication with the market leaders that are actually working, because we know that there's a lot of people that aren't. So again, kind of that two-way street right now. But I think right now is talking as much as you can and understanding what they're hearing, what they're seeing, because every day there's something different. No week is the same, which is part of why, you know, I love the industry I'm in. But even more so now, it's like overnight something crazy can happen, and you got to understand what that looks like and how it might be impacting, maybe not your specific market right away, but it could be impacting other areas. And just hasn't hit you yet. So yeah, I think that's super important.
Hey, Ryan, what about you? I mean, what has Booking.com been doing to partner with hotels and help them to recover from this?
So I think, and Nicole had mentioned it in regards to content updates, in regards to health and safety procedures. So that was a huge push in that regard. But there was also additional initiatives when we were looking at it for recovery. So when we looked at recovery, we specifically looked at recovery in different phases, and we wanted to also come out with action plans that hotels could utilize to work on. So a perfect example would be at the beginning when the pandemic really hit and everything went on lockdown, I had a call with a management company saying, like, what is your action plan? What are a couple things that we can focus on we can track and maintain. So I do think that action plan is definitely needed, even though things might change on a weekly basis. So I know what we've also done, and I'll get into some, like I said, product stuff, but where I said to partners, like, if you want to speak every single week and you want to just talk and have a touch point, then let's speak every single week and look at information. And we always find a different way to look at information, especially when it comes to our analytics. Like Nicole brought up pace. So if we can't look at pace, and if we can't look at year over year pace, how can we look at pace? So there's definitely different ways to look at it and different ways to measure it. I would say from a product perspective, especially with the big chains, well, a lot of the big branded hotels, so you saw Hyatt do it, you saw Marriott do it, where they were really getting away with their advanced purchase rates and everything had a flexible cancellation. Booking.com came out with a really seamless way to make sure that you can stay competitive by just making your hotel make sure all your rates are flexible with one click. And then it was also even looking at something else, when knowing that if so much demand is last minute, looking at like your overall cancellation policy. If you are literally disadvantaged by having a 72-hour cancellation policy, while all of the big brands are now 24. So I think looking at products, looking at content, and it can not just be just rate. Rate is a big player in the game. I think it's looking at different things. It's always paying attention to the front end. Michelle Vrod, who's our area manager, always says don't like forget about the front end. So look at the front end and look at what the guest looks at. And I would say that when you do that, you can have a whole strategy conversation in regards to what the guest is looking at and what filters are being used. And especially with recovery, we're really developing additional filters.
Yeah, and one other piece to add to that was really helpful with one of our partners in Hawaii, where a lot of this COVID cancellation and loss of business and displacement started. We had a lot of guests to communicate to. And with, some of the features that OTAs have to do a mass like auto reply based on date of arrival or property, and you can craft your message to tell the guests what's going on, especially when you have so many guests that are coming from the OTAs and might not be getting your email communications or looking on your website as often as someone that might book direct. So that was a really, really crucial piece that was super helpful to get all the information that we needed out to as many people as possible and not have a lot of labor involved with that. So that was a really, really big asset I found. That was our first kind of thing we noticed with how OTAs are helping with recovery, making it really easy to communicate those changes of business and making it really easy on the vendors. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Actually, to piggyback on that, I think like the automatic replies have been, especially because operations staff have really been cut down in hotels, using automatic replies. The way I actually saw it utilized really well within a chain in New York is they're doing contactless check-in, where you can actually use the brand's app to check in seamlessly. And they wanted to make sure that it was sent within a specific amount of time. So it's something that you could have based on a guest arrives in 3 days, 3 days from check-in, you can make sure they get this message that it's a welcome message. So you can send that, and then they also get the information, get them to download your brand site app or whatever brand site initiatives that you have, so they can actually start getting your brand marketing. So it is legitimately a partnership, and we're leading them to become your customer, but it also helps with seamless check-in. So I would definitely look at the auto reply. It'll minimize the operational kind of hassle that I know a lot of hotels are dealing with, and then it'll also have a positive effect on your own brand presence.
Excellent. So, Ryan, have you seen any pitfalls that hotels have fallen into that maybe we should caution people not to do?
I would say yes and no. I think yes and no. I think pitfalls are it's a little funky, because we're also dealing with a market that hotels are operating at much lower occupancies than they can afford to operate at. So I think a lot of hotels, I think one of the pitfalls is maybe reacting too late could be a pitfall, if that technically is one, where, for instance, we have individual data. I would say if your market manager is seeing something or seeing successes, take their advice, or at least try to take a chance. And especially for Instance, Marathon in New York was huge, and it was, I wouldn't say it was pretty obvious that Marathon was being canceled. It was, I can't imagine it was. Like after Boston Marathon was canceled, you would probably assume that New York would be canceled. And I think hotels maybe waited longer than they should have. And I guess they were being hopeful, and I don't blame them for being hopeful. I think we all want to be hopeful. But I think that's the one thing, is really holding out. The other thing that I don't know if it's a pitfall, but I know New York and the DHS presence in New York, it hurts a hotel's brand image. So I know you have to operate a specific cost, but that's something else where hotels have taken on a lot of DHS in New York. But besides that, I think the only pitfall I can really point to is proactivity. Like try to be as proactive as possible. Think outside the box. If you're not thinking outside of the box now, there's really no opportunity or time to do it. And if you do something and you try something, I think now is when you can see rather a great impact or a very minimal negative impact.
Nicole, what about you? What have you observed?
Yeah, I was going to start with just don't ignore the OTAs. So, and just in general, don't, I know we're limited, so it's tough. But you need to realize that people are going to want to travel again. And I think the way that hotels are managing what they're doing right now is going to bring, more business, have the phone start ringing again a little bit more when people are starting to travel. Maybe it won't be until next year, but at least you're, keeping communication and keeping involved and just keeping engagement. I think that's really important because we're all feeling a little disconnected, not being in our usual routines and being with each other. So correlating that to the guests as you would, I think is super important. I think a pitfall, which I don't know if this is necessarily related to just recovery, but in general, especially in New York, unfortunately, there seems to be like a race to the bottom with rates, and who is in your neighborhood competition right now is not necessarily who you were looking at last year. So we really need to look at, am I pricing myself the same as a 2.5-star property in Times Square, which has very, very competitive rates and, pretty much cutthroat competition to steal business from each other. So kind of rethinking who you're looking at as your competitive set might be something to consider. I also think that you want to perhaps protect your brand as best you can for the future. And the guests that you do have that are coming to visit you right now, maybe that isn't your typical guest. So you want to position your pricing to be, reflecting of that. You can't be too high out of the water to really, lock yourself out of any business. But just because the hotel down the street that you used to compete with is offering $99 doesn't mean that you need to do that. So I think that's a big area that I'm hoping doesn't happen, although I'm seeing it all over the place. So that's definitely one area I would say to look out for.
Yeah, definitely. And you have to be aware of who your comp set is now, because hotels are closing. And one frustrating thing I know that I've seen is there's no indication on a lot of sites. You got to hunt and peck to figure out when hotels are reopening. And so that's got to be frustrating for customers. So yeah, I think definitely just dropping your price does not create demand. And I don't know how many times we've said that during the series, but we have. So Ryan, a question from the audience for you. It says, being part of the OTA industry, how have you stayed in communication with your hotels and or partners? And have you taken an active approach or just more of a standby approach if they needed anything?
So I'll do pre-COVID and now COVID. So booking.com is always, so we have this, I may quote it wrong. But booking.com, one of our values is to be globally relevant and locally present. So that's huge. And I think what sets us apart from our competitors is we, and Carol and Nicole can kind of speak on this, especially whenever they're around, I was always making sure that I was available in person at all times, as long as I was free. And it really comes down to it, and it's also set, it's coming from top down, is our company says, like, this is a partnership. If what are your expectations? Like, how often do you want to see my face? How often do you want to see me? Like, where can I do? Like, what can I do differently? But there's been times where I've been sitting at my desk and I was overseeing, and our office is in FIDI, where I would just get up and then literally walk over to the hotel that was across the street just to check in with the front desk so they knew who the face of Booking.com or their contact was. So that was huge during COVID, prior to COVID. But I would also do monthly meetings with management companies where I would just show up and flood their office with food and work from their office for a day. And the impact of that would be huge. And that didn't mean that I only saw them once a month, because we would communicate via email or on the phone or text message all the time. And I think Nicole can speak on that, that a simple text like, hey, can you call me in 20 minutes can go a long way. I would say during COVID, and I had mentioned it earlier, I had set up a call with key management companies that are overseas, as well as individual hotels at the beginning, came up with an action plan, and also set the expectation of how often do you want to speak. And as of right now, I speak to the numerous hotels once a week or bi-weekly consistently on video calls. A lot of times they don't show their face, but I will always show my face. So that's a big thing. I will say the big part of it is if you're on a conference call, if you're using Zoom or anything, show your face. Like it only helps. So that's a big thing. And even to the point where I actually have partners who are working, it's just like, if you can do something or like send them something or just interact or check in, I think that's huge. So it's the constant communication. I'm always a big proponent to always react, to always be proactive. There are hotels that I do have to be reactive with because the communication isn't so great, but I will consistently do whatever it takes to build that, to find different stakeholders, which I always think is huge. That there could be other stakeholders at the hotel that you could positively influence. So always checking in, try to be as proactive as possible. And that's just, like I said, top down in regards to our company. They want us to be in markets, especially markets in Long Island, and like the New York office does oversee markets in Long Island and Connecticut. And these account managers, they do on weeks and off weeks. And they did this before COVID, where they would literally be out in the market for an entire week straight and visiting hotels the entire week, even if it was just drop-ins. And that's something that we always did, and hopefully we get to do again.
Yeah, that's great, Ryan. Another follow-on question from the audience about that, though, is, you know, we happen to have worked together in one of the busiest and most volume high cities in the world. And of course, you know, we also managed some large counts with you. So how do hotels that are, you know, perhaps independent and boutique, or even part of a brand, but the relationships at the brand level versus the hotel level, you know, how are they to partner with OTAs, and how can they make the most of the relationship? You know, I found that that's an area that's been a struggle, and thank you for coming to our rescue in some of those situations where we couldn't get a market manager on the phone. And, you know, we really appreciate that relationship with you, of how you help us navigate that. But, you know, for a hotel that may not have a Ryan, you know, what are they supposed to do, and what do you suggest?
So I would start it off, if you don't get an answer ever, I'm glad to share my email address. Email me and I'll give you it. So just as
that's a scary proposition,
he
right?
means it too, which
so I'm gonna say,
I know.
So I will say, and a lot of people don't actually know this, so we're going to start off with, you're just trying to find out who your account manager is. You don't have a Ryan. The relationship is not like Carol, Nicole, and myself. You can actually find the contact directly in the extranet. So you actually have a local contact, and that will be in the extranet. So that's there automatically, and it's normally, it's the same thing. If you know our first name and last name, so say you know who we are, our email address is always first name, last name at booking.com. But I will say is, our industry is very, very small. Our industry has always been tiny. So I would always ask somebody else, do you know somebody at booking.com? Do you know, because I also know who my Expedia counterpart is. I also know who my Agoda counterpart is. And we are, so even we do separate, we do function separate. So I would say, even ask, like I've even asked, like I've had hotels ask me, who do you think my Expedia contact is? Or who is my Agoda contact? And I've been able to help them. So that's if you don't get an answer. I would say also, it's the same thing as like, use your internal connections. But if you do have, I guess, me in place, just ask like, hey, do you know who the account manager is for this market? Because I'd be more than happy, and I've done it before, is CC that person and hey, this is Nicole, this is Carol, worked with them, here you go. It's happened before, because there's also been communication coming from our end being like, oh, are you managing this account now? And we've done the introduction for you. So I would say, look at it does have a contact. I wish it was highlighted better. I do wish it was highlighted better. I would say in really, really small markets, and it's something that I personally am working on, so hopefully it gets better, is in really small markets, you may not have the same oversight as you do in high volume markets. And we mentioned that, like, it might be a very small town. It might not be LA or Chicago or New York. In those instances, you may not have a designated individual. I'm working on expanding that. So I will say that should change. I want to take full ownership of that. But at the same time, if you do know a past Booking.com account manager and you worked with a different market, reach out to them. Especially if you had a good relationship. They'll never say no. I can't even imagine they'd ever say no, that they're not willing to help you. It takes 2 seconds to look at internal metrics and maybe give you some advice, or look at one thing together. And I think with you specifically, and we've looked at it, looking at another market and doing a quick fix and getting you in contact with an account manager has been super simple. And it always helps us in the long run. Like, it helps both of us. So I hope that helped. And that was my rambling answer. But talk to your peers. I would say that always helps. Yeah. Somebody at Booking.com.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think you and a couple of other people that we've worked with at Booking.com have been really great about that. I mean, we were working with a hotel in Italy and couldn't get anywhere at all. And, someone in Boston helped us. So, it's because we had a relationship, right? And they were more than willing to do that. So, I would say that has, been a great relationship all around with our Booking.com market managers, that they are always willing to go the extra mile with us for the most part. So shifting to a different question here, and I know you guys have mentioned some things, but again, I go back to, we have had a great experience working together as a team. So I'm going to start with you, Ryan. What are some of the things that Nicole, because she was your primary, or is your primary contact with us in New York, what are some of the things that she has done that have made the relationship stronger, specifically, so that we were able to build upon that and see success for our hotels?
I'll circle back to the communication thing. I think I'm a big proponent of responding fast. Nicole has always done that in regards to taking over a new account. And the first time, just as some insight, the first time we met was when I actually first was taking over the pod hotels, and it was the same thing. So we both did it at the same time, and it was new to us. And it's the same thing. We met in person, and that's a big thing, is that if we can meet in person, we meet in person. If we can talk as often as possible, but the communication is key. And then the building the trust. Like, Nicole had faith in the information that I was giving her. I'm not going to make up information. I'm going to tell you what I can tell you. And I will say she took chances, and I think that was a big step in the right direction. That it was like, look at something. If we say this is what we see working and you think it can fit in with your overall strategy, Nicole was willing to take the chance and try it, because nothing was finite. So that was huge. Making sure the communication piece was always huge, and just like straight transparency, just be transparent. And I think we were able to set realistic goals that both of us were able to measure together, and giving insight to your internal strategy was also super beneficial, because I know like what works for you, what you want to do better, and that made the relationship seamless. And even today, it's like we see where that came. Like, Nicole will shoot me a quick text, and it's the same thing, and then vice versa. It's really comes down to communication and transparency in regards to the strategy, and Nicole did that very well. Yeah.
So Nicole, the reverse on you, what was it that Ryan did that made the relationship so strong?
I think, besides the communication and, trusting that what he was saying was accurate. I know we've definitely had some debates as well, which I appreciated, where I wasn't just taking all of his information and saying, okay, let's run with it. I was, challenging him on things that didn't look right. And he'd be the first one to say, hey, you're probably right. Let's just, pause this. I'll get back to you on that. So, not trying to, push anything that's going to hurt the revenue strategy of the hotel. And I think that was one of the areas of trust that I found right away with him was that you understood the operational pieces and the revenue strategy of hotels specifically in New York and specifically in different markets of New York. And our account that we were working on together was, throughout Manhattan and also in Brooklyn. So we had a lot of areas that we needed to cover and understand. And Ryan's ability to also have that communication with other revenue leaders in the area to give me insight in terms of what they were seeing and if what we were seeing was aligned, things to look out for that, again, kind of help build that trust and just build an understanding of what really is going on and what makes sense for the hotels. Also, he's just funny, so that makes things easy. We have a good time, so I think our personalities kind of, mesh well. So that's always, kind of an easy thing to do, but we can also, get down to business. Sometimes we'll, ask each other what's going on and we won't get to the point until 20 minutes later, or vice versa. We'll just be all business and we'll talk for 15 or 5 minutes and we can get a lot accomplished in that amount of time. We can both, bounce around things pretty quickly and get things actioned fairly quickly as well. And I think, having that quick turnaround and that, quick information is super critical, and Ryan was able to provide that information not only just for our hotels but overall market. So that again was super, super important, that you understand that analytical component and you were able to relate that to what's happening like on a big level, and then shrink it down to your specific market that you're in New York City, and how your other competition in that specific market is handling things and what they're doing that worked, what didn't work. So again, I think understanding that depth was really, really helpful for me, and that kind of kicked us off in the right direction.
Yeah. So I have an interesting question from the audience here. What do you recommend hotels do with their photos on OTAs now? Should we take new ones with our team wearing masks and socially distanced protocols and our sanitation theater, or leave it all the same? What do you think, Ryan?
So content was something that it's the same thing, like when you look at hotels and you're having conversations weekly, the goal is to not run out of ideas. So I would say I did a whole content, like I focused on content a couple weeks ago. And I would say in regards to photos and mask wearing, healthy health and safety procedures, I think you can highlight it, but I do know OTAs are doing it in a better way when it comes to, if you go to booking.com, especially in the app, it's very well highlighted. So I would look at what's not highlighted well. What can you do differently with content? And we know right now what's fueling Manhattan, or you look at these markets, are outdoor spaces. We literally are flocking to outdoor spaces. So whether it's rooftops or courtyards or any of that, make it your first photo. Because if you can actually, because that's literally what New Yorkers are flocking to. So if you don't have a pool, obviously if it's summer and your pool's open and you can have your pool, make that your first photo. But if you have outdoor spaces, what I was working on was highlight rooftops. Even if your rooftop doesn't have F&B outlets open, it's still something that can draw a guest to your hotel, opposed to your competitor if they don't have it. So if you do want to highlight health and safety procedures, you can do it. I don't know if I would really recommend it, because I would really trust the technology and the R&D that OTAs put behind the settings that actually highlight health and safety features. And if you can use your content to highlight what your product is and how it differs from your comp set, especially when it comes to outdoor spaces. And if you can do it in the same thing when it comes to the winter, then switch it and make sure you're switching and that would be COVID or no COVID. I would always make sure that you're culling through your photos on a seasonality basis to make sure that you're highlighting certain things.
I would add, I think for transient driven markets like the OTAs are, that makes a lot of sense. I think on the group side, I think there is going to have to be a complete rehaul of our images and photos, because I think we're going to have, concerns from meeting planners and attendees of meetings for a long time forward. And so hotels are going to need to figure out how to invest a little bit of money into showing different group photos. I've seen meetings and events places on a hotel's own website where just shows everybody on top of each other still. And I think we need to figure out, I don't think that's going to encourage people to come back from a group standpoint, but we know groups a lot further off than transient, of course. So the question I have now, and I'm going to shoot this at you as well, Ryan, but are there any positive trends you're seeing at Booking.com that indicate any sort of return to, I hate to use the word normalcy because I know we're not going to be there, but any sort of recovery?
So we were talking about this before. I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know when things are going to change magically. But I will say, and there's information that I can't relay, but I will relay positives. So we'll look at like what positives we've seen. And if we're looking at it, knowing that we're probably in this for a little longer than we would hope, if we look at certain markets and high volume markets, if we look at the end of, say we look at the end of March, beginning of April, overall, there were net negative bookings consistently. Hotels were canceling way more than they were booking. Their cancellation rates were 99% easily, because all hotels were closing and they weren't rebooking. And looking at it now, if you look at New York, for instance, the overall cancellation rate in New York in the last month has actually substantially dropped from the 90s to the high 60s. So that's super positive, especially for hotels that are open today. I've worked with hotels that are open today that if their booking patterns are falling where the demand is falling, they're seeing 30 to 40% cancellation rates, which still you would like them to be lower, but knowing the fact that a hotel has decreased their cancellation rate by 40 to 50% in a month or two has been super positive, because I know hotels right now, they're able to hit specific occupancies on the weekends, which they never hit before because it's mostly leisure business, that they weren't able to ever. So I would say that's a positive, the fact that the cancellation rate has gone down. I think if we look at certain things and it's super far out, if you look at high volume markets like New York, or you look at Chicago or Boston, and you look at next summer, all international travel, people want to get out. So international travel, people are booking that far out. So I would say don't take, like, if you can focus on now and you are open, focus on now, but look super long-term, like super long-term. I would say same time last year, we would be talking about Q1. Right now I'm talking about Q3 and Q4 of 2021 is where to focus, because we do see the volume. I would say the other positive is that, because I did a mini staycation and I stayed at a hotel in Brooklyn that had a pool, and the hotel was busy. The hotel was busy. They were able to keep everything at a specific capacity when it came to the pool, to the gym, to all of this, where I did not feel like I was at risk, and they were running a busy hotel. So I think that in general, that knowing that hotels are able to capture additional revenue from people traveling within New York is incredible. Because if we look at numbers, week booked growth within internal travel is growing, and guests are actually traveling more often, which is what we see. So we do see guests traveling more often, but just staying much shorter. So we see people wanting to get out. And I would say that's a positive. When it comes to booking volumes, obviously, the booking volumes are down, but there are certain months super, super far out that are out booking same time last year.
So do you think, based upon that and looking further out, that OTAs could help hotels replace some of our lost base business from groups?
100%. I think if you reframe your mindset from an OTA being an OTA to an OTA being a marketing platform for you. So change the way you overall just define what an OTA is. Look at it as just marketing spend. That if you know, for instance, that you've had to increase your brand marketing spend because of the situation we're in, look at trying to replace that via OTAs. And the fact is that OTAs we're still relevant. We're still spending money on marketing. We're still really, like, look at I think Booking.com on our app, if you look at the amount of downloads. So I would say, look at that information and look how much traffic OTAs can bring and the presence that we can bring. And if you can get your brand site to populate really well super far in advance on an OTA and get that brand presence, you're only paying if it actualizes. So you're not spending marketing spend, because customer acquisition is super expensive. It's pretty much the highest cost.
Right.
So if you look at Booking.com as a marketing platform and market your hotel really well on OTAs, it could end up helping group business in the long run. Just in general, getting your name out there. If a tourism group is, I'm assuming a tourism group is looking at OTAs. If they're looking at OTAs and you rank really well and you're really prevalent on a search super far out, I'll bet that if that hotel was not like top of mind for that tourism group, that they would probably be looking at it more than they were in the past.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen some business actualize on the group side from OTAs. You don't know who's hiding under maybe an OTA reservation, so that's also something to think about for your GMs and your owners that maybe don't agree with the strategy of looking at OTAs as a lead business, where you might have people coming for a travel vacation, but they might be in charge of a big account that you're trying to get. So that was a situation we had with one of my hotels in California, where the CEO of a financial firm that we were trying to attract group business from stayed with us, but they booked under Expedia. And luckily the front desk team knew that, so they were able to make the stay as best they can for the guest, and they wound up converting into group business. But had we had not maybe had that leisure experience for that guest, they might not have converted it into bringing their meeting space and their meeting group over to our hotel. So that was definitely a good story to tell on how OTAs can be a marketing arm for you and not just looked at as taking part of your pie. And I also think that the acquisition of the guests that you do get from booking.com or any other OTA, you can work on converting them into a guest that might want to come and stay with you and book directly. So I think there's, again, strategies that you can place for future business and also for business that you've already acquired from the OTAs.
I did want to point out.
So Nicole, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
We're mentioning group, but I think the one thing that we know is dead, but I wouldn't say it's completely dead, is business travel right now. Is if you know that a lot of corporate contracts are not renewing their contracts, look at your business travel insight on one of the OTAs, and booking.com does have good business travel insight. Because our business travel, you look at certain markets, is higher than you would immediately think. And a lot of people are aware of Expedia's agencia program, but I would say ask about booking.com's Booking for Business program and like what initiatives there are and what we can do, because I've spoken to hotels where they're seeing business travel and they're seeing volume through these channels. So especially if that's something you want to supplement or work on, that there is some business travel out there. If that's happening, for instance, there were the hurricanes, and the hurricanes brought in different types of business travel where I know people personally that actually traveled cross country because they needed to help with power lines in New York, and they stayed in hotels. So I think it's also look at OTAs, whether it's group, 100%, can we look at supplementing that, but also look at the business sector as well. Yeah,
good point. So Nicole, you mentioned this earlier, but I want to expand on it a little bit. How have you used the analytics that you can get from our partnership with OTAs to improve performance at our hotels and to help develop the appropriate strategies?
So I think probably there's a lot of key features in the dashboard that I like to use. The first thing I usually look at is the booking pace based on your booking window. So you can see how your hotel's performing from a lead time. So if you're getting a lot of business inside of 7 days, are you meeting your fair share in your market? So is the market stealing share from you in that area of booking window, as well as rate? So you can kind of compare those two things and see, hey, we have this really great strategy to attract last minute business, but we're getting beat out, terribly when you look at business that's, 90 plus days out. So I think, that's a super great tool to see where we're not necessarily getting that insight in our hotel spaces. Some hotels are, very robust and have a lot of analytic tools, but a lot of them don't have that. And especially that forward looking and specifically to transient business that you're trying to attract. And right now that's really what we're going after, since we know that there's, halt on group travel. A lot of companies just are not the same as they used to be, and they're not going to be for a little bit. So that's one area I definitely recommend looking at. You can also get the dashboards crafted to what you like to look at based on your hotel and what your market is, so that can automatically get sent to you. So that's something that I like, because it's, one less thing for me to have to go look and pull and see. I also think the area of comparison is super interesting because you can take not only your hotel performance year over year, but you can also look at the market level. You can look at your comp set specifically that you've selected in the OTA to compare yourself against that. There's also a peer group that Booking.com has that you can actually, see what you look like based on like hotels that maybe you're not necessarily considering, and measure your performance against them. And also at the market level. So you can have a lot of different areas of how you're winning or losing in different sections there. So I think that's really important to look at. Also the demographics of who's coming, looking at what countries might be popping up in your market. Like I was just looking, again, the UK is definitely coming in on OTA business and direct business, not necessarily for this year, but looking ahead. So that's another area of marketing that you could use that might shift how you're spending your digital efforts and attracting those types of UK or international travelers a little bit further out. And there's also just a lot of enhancements that are usually, every quarter or so, I would say that are available to you. So keeping up to date with what's going on the back end and, playing around with different reports. Some of them, might not be as useful to you, but just to keep that as another area of analytics that you can take a look at is great because there's so much information that the OTAs have that hotels just don't get. So to be able to go somewhere and use that information and, take that to your revenue strategy meetings with your hotel teams is pretty important. I like to do kind of a deep dive into OTA analytics, maybe, twice a month or once a month, just to give an idea of what, we're seeing out there and compare that to what we're seeing on brand.com or just direct business to correlate any activity or opportunities that we might be having. And then again, really just comparing it to what's happening right now in the market. And you can filter out where you're looking at this comparison by 7 days, 7 days. So what happened in the last week, what happened in the last month, what happened, in the last year. And right now, I think looking week by week is super important because everything's changing so quickly that if you have that on your fingertips, just to at least have a pulse check, that's been really helpful for me always. And especially now I look at it pretty frequently, honestly. Because there's so much activity going to the OTAs and being able to look at it based on lead is really important right now.
Great. So Ryan, with those analytics, Nicole's been using these for a long time and is very often self-directed in how she goes and finds this data or asks questions about how to use things. But what's the best way for a hotel to know how to use everything that you provide?
I would say same thing, like if your meetings, like there are instances where I've had partners that we've worked with and Booking.com has worked with for years, and they normally the OTA or their contact is the one that maybe runs the reports or pulls it prior to meeting. And I shifted away from that to the point where myself, I wanted to pull it with the partner or literally get the partner to pull it themselves. So I would say in general, if you're having a conversation with your account manager, do a walkthrough. Ask for the information to be literally shown how to look at it. Because Nicole mentioned peer group. The same exact thing. There's literally before when we always looked at pace and we looked at year over year, and that doesn't make sense anymore. So literally just getting it to change to peer group. And when you do, especially Booking.com's analytics, is automatically you may not understand what the report means. And you can't really assume what it means. So I would say, ask the questions. Ask to do a straight run through. And I would also ask, what reports do we use the most? Because we have a bunch of internal tools, but a lot of times we're using the internal analytics. So ask, what tool do you use all the time? What tool do you go to immediately? So that's a question I would always ask is ask us what we like using. Ask us what searches we like looking at, what filters we like using to, and do a step-by-step run through.
I actually have a question for you on that. Is there any enhancement on kind of the competitive landscape in terms of who might be stealing your bookings from you or what hotels are getting picked up you know, now versus where they were in the past. I mean, I know you have the analytics, but it's not available to
Correct.
a user, but that'd be very helpful for
what is it? Who's stealing
my lunch? Yeah, but a lot of that is like on a 30-day window, and it doesn't really necessarily correlate.
I would say direct answer, no.
Okay.
Correct answer would be, if you look at your peer group, and just to highlight that, we're looking at 50 similar hotels, same star level, same similar room count, similar amenities, and the closest 50. So if that's being taken in consideration, and automatically right off the bat, we don't know what those 50 hotels are, we have an internal search to understand what those 50 hotels are. So I would say it might take a little bit extra work to work together, but then we can really understand who are these 50 hotels and where do you really sit? Because we can look at, you know what, like how you're booking and maybe see what hotels are outperforming. So that's a way to look at it. And when we look at outperformance, a lot of times I'm looking at booked room nights or booked revenue. And when you're looking at peer group, but then we can look at like future months, I would say, so that's like you would want to work through it. I wish there was more developments. There is something, and I know a lot of people, they laugh and scoff at me when I say this. If you're in the extranet, regardless of any page that you're on, because a lot of the extranet has been built and reformed based on partner feedback, there's a little feedback button all the way at the bottom. Hit it and use it, because I'm telling you, we have a whole team designated to building product based on the feedback that is given, and a lot of tools have been built because of that.
Great, thank you. So I have one more question from the audience, and then we're close to wrapping here. We've only got 6 more minutes. So the question was around the protocols that are in place right now for COVID. Do you see some of those continuing once there's a vaccine? You know, if so, do you have any idea of what people are looking for and what they might most want to have in a hotel? You know, are there areas in Booking.com, for example, that they gravitate to or read more, or page views or whatever?
So I would say the health and safety procedures, if they will continue, just to highlight that question, I do not know. I don't know. I think we really like Booking up, like on our end, we do thousands of A/B tests a day. So you might see something in the extra, see something on the front end that may look funky, and then the next day it's gone. I think if and when it does change, I know communication will probably go out. Health and safety is a huge aspect. And if hotels, and we always look at conversion and what converts better. If we see when hotels update their health and safety procedures that a hotel converts better, we would never take it down. So even after the fact, I can imagine if a vaccine comes out, Booking.com is going to look at the impact to conversion rates. And if a hotel, like, because you can take away your health and safety procedures. So like if a hotel takes it down, how does a hotel convert after the fact? And if hotels start negatively converting because it's gone, we'll never get rid of it. Because we want hotels to convert better. And I guess the second, what was the second part of that? What?
Are there areas that people are spending more time looking at within Booking.com right now?
So I always say it, same thing, look at the front end. When you're ever doing a search, always look at the filters on the left-hand side of the page. So you'll search your date, you'll get your list of hotels, and then you'll see top utilized filters. So for New York, for years, it'll be Times Square, then breakfast, then free parking. So those are always, and then if you switch your dates, it'll always change. If you switch your markets, it'll always change. So I would always highlight looking at the front end and looking at those filters because they're utilized. And that's why, and Carol and Nicole probably know, I'm the biggest proponent of breakfast if you have a New York hotel, because it is the easiest way to steal share from your comp set. Because if you're doing it and you hit that filter and your comp set isn't doing it, they will no longer appear. So that's a big thing. Look at the filters, and it will directly tell you what guests are looking for. And look at the filters with different days of what and how those change. So those filters are huge. People use it. And I think that would be a pretty straightforward answer of what guests are looking for, because it does change consistently.
Yeah, good. I don't know if I realized that. So that's great. Now, I learned something.
As of right now, it's pools and parking.
Pools and what?
Pools and parking.
Parking. I thought you said parties. That was getting me a little worried.
Pools and parking. So I would say if you don't have a pool, it's the same thing. Like a great example of like some insight with like parking. So there is a filter to do parking, but say you have an upgraded room type, you have a suite. It's not selling great as during COVID. There's a way, for instance, that you could say, you know what, let me make that one room type parking inclusive. And Booking.com, and we can do that. And you can say, you know what, you'll name it deluxe suite, complimentary parking. And there's literally, if that's something that you can do, if you own the parking or if you want to work something out. But that's a great example, like pools and parking. If you don't have the pool, then look at parking. And I think that's it, is like, what can you do? And that's not an OTA just telling you to lower your rates.
Right.
No, that's great. You're telling us to merchandise what's important to the customer. So that's a completely different conversation. Yeah. So we're about done here. So I want to give each of you a final word. I want to thank everyone for coming today. Reminder, this will be on the website in the next 48 hours or less, and it'll be on YouTube so that it can be rebroadcast. Next week, I'm going to be interviewing Marisa Thompson regarding marketing strategies for recovery. And she is a brilliant marketer, and I'm sure everyone's going to learn a lot from her. So final word, Nicole, I'll give you the first final word. So if you had one piece of advice for revenue leaders in their partnership with OTAs, what would you say to them?
I think what I'd say is to test and learn. Also, don't get stuck in old logic. Always look at pieces of business strategies in a new way. Don't get married to one specific strategy or the other, and utilize the information that OTAs can provide to you to help back those decisions up. Because as revenue leaders, you're not only having to convince yourself first that this is a good idea to present to your other revenue leader teams, your sales teams, and your GMs. So the more information you have on a broader scale of what's happening right now is only going to help support your efforts, and test them, see how they work, and give an analysis on that strategy is really, really, really important.
Great. How about you, Ryan?
I would say speak to us on the phone. That's my always a good point of advice. I'd say speak to us on the phone. I would say same thing, just have open communication. That's always, and set up a game plan. Set up a game plan, set up a target, and there's never an instance where we're going to we'll ask questions, but even if you come to us and say, I've had hotels come to us and say, I want to decrease OTA contribution by 20%. I'll stick to that 20%. We have the game plan. But if you're decreasing by 60% and totally off that path, make sure that we set a game plan and we stick to it. And if things change, update us. And I think it's all, I said, it goes back to communication, set up a game plan, be receptive, and then also don't be afraid to kind of get the whole hotel or whatever it is to have a relationship with Booking.com, whether it's the GM or even the same thing. I've also spoken to owners, hotel owners, knowing who we are and what we do, and asking where we could help. So individual stakeholders, and pretty much just building the relationship. And what I will say is that you may notice that in OTAs, sometimes contacts change, and that may happen, but our goal, and I know from our end, is always to make sure the relationship between the hotel and the OTA stays strong, and you can always revert back to that contact that you had a really good relationship with. And I'll let you know from a Booking.com end, we will never, ever turn you away for any reason and try to help you out. Awesome.
Yeah, we can definitely attest to that. Well, listen, Ryan, Nicole, thank you so much for being here. Stay well in New York City, and I look forward to speaking with you again really soon. Okay.